Hey everybody, welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This is going to be a pretty awesome video on soft bodies. So we're basically going to be creating a really cool simulation similar to what you're seeing on the screen right now. And let's go ahead and get started. Now, what you're seeing on the screen right now is just something that I created, again, like you saw in the intro there. And this is going to be available on Gumroad, so you can check the download link below in the video description. But basically, we're going to be creating something similar to what you're seeing right here. So we're going to be creating this really neat little soft body simulation, and it's going to look kind of like a jell-o dessert or something like that. Included in the project file is going to be this animation as well that shows sort of like a little sort of like jell-o drop scene. You can see right here, it animates to this really neat little plop, and then it goes like that. So pretty fun project to do and to experiment with and play around with. If you'd like to download the file, again, it's down in the video description. Okay, so to begin with, let's go ahead and open up a new default scene, and we're basically just going to go through this fairly quickly just so I can show you the basics on creating a simulation like that. So you can see that I have the screencast keys in the bottom left here so you can see what I'm doing. Go ahead and start by creating this ground plane here, and we're going to create basically a collision surface. So I'm going to scale this up by 10, and let's go ahead and apply the scale and go over here to the physics properties and turn on a collision. And basically what this does is it creates a surface for anything that's like a rigid body or a soft body or particles or anything like that. It will fall and connect with that surface. So that's what that is there. Now, the next step, I'm going to show you how to use a text and a particular type of text that is going to show a little bit of a problem. But you can do this with a regular cube or a sphere or something like that as long as it's set up in quads. So what I mean is if you want it to be a ball, don't use the UV sphere. You might want to use a rounded cube, which is a cube here, control 2, which will add a subsurface modifier and then apply that. But basically, you can create a sort of primitive object that will have these same qualities to allow it to be a soft body. But because I want to show you how to do this with a more complex object, let's go ahead and do a text object. And I'm going to do a D, a capital D. You can do whatever you'd like, but I want to show you a particular issue that shows up. And I'm going to, in the font area here, I'm going to choose this right here, Bauhaus 93, because I really, really like it. It's what I use for a lot of my, I'm going to use / here on the numpad to isolate this. It's what I use for a lot of my logos and stuff like that. And I really like the font typeface. But what we'll do here is I'm going to take the geometry, I'm going to extrude it out to about there. And I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to call one of these save. Okay, so I'm going to call this D save. And we can hit M and move, actually, let's go out of the local view here. Select the D save, hit M, new collection, and we'll call this save. And this is just where we're going to place some things that we want to keep just in case we need to go back. So let's go ahead and take this text here. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click, convert to mesh. And I'm going to go back into local view here with the / on the numpad because we're going to remesh this. In order for soft bodies and things like that to work out kind of correctly, we can't just have it like this. And if we also look at this and we start to grab things and move it around, do you see right there how the points are doubled up? So we have to select all inside of edit mode here. We have to hit A to select all, M for merge, and then by distance. And what that's going to do is remove. You can see right there at the bottom it says removed 182 vertices. Now we have one full mesh here. The other issue is you see that this is all triangulated. Okay, and that's kind of an issue because if we're going to create a soft body, it's going to have some sort of strange results if we have it look like this with these really long quads here and these tris. So what we can do is we can add a modifier and go down to where it says remesh. And you'll notice that something weird sort of happens. And basically what it's doing is it's taking a voxel. So you can see there, output a mesh corresponding to the volume of the original mesh. And we're going to use this. You could try and use the other ones, but we're going to use this right now because it creates quads out of our object. And for the voxel size, what we want to do is reduce this down. So if we go to the left, you can see it gets smaller. And we want to kind of put it down to a reasonable value. Now, before you sort of select one of these, there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. Number one, you can see that this is sort of filling in a gap here, which is sort of a problem. And you can try using some of these other methods here. And whoops. And you can see that there really isn't anything that happens. You can click on smooth shaded, but really that doesn't resolve this issue here. And what this is basically, and don't do this because if you have a not as powerful computer, you could run into an issue with your memory and it sort of having a problem with showing you what this looks like. But let's reduce this down to where that gap is actually visible. And you can see that it's a 0.013. And I know this because I've done this already a couple times, but down to this value, when you do a soft body, it really takes a long time to calculate this kind of mesh. So how can we get this gap back in here and have a larger, sort of like less complex mesh data for us to create this object? So I'm going to leave this on like a 0.025, for example, and I'm going to go into edit mode. You can see that it looks back to what it was before the remesh, but if I turn this on, you can see that we can actually see on the cage here what it looks like with this modifier. And if we go into wireframe and we actually select some of this, what we're going to do is we're just going to move some of these over to the right and move it over just enough to where this doesn't become a problem anymore. And you'll see that this happens with things like a lowercase I or anything that's kind of closely related, or maybe some text that is, let's say there's a T right next to a D. It might end up looking kind of weird like that. So let's do this where we select those here, hit O to turn on proportional editing right up here, and you can grab it with G, and you can see that we kind of have a lot that we're grabbing here, but let's roll down on the mouse wheel, and you can see that now we have less and less. Lock it on the X axis, which will go across, and reduce this down to where we're not actually grabbing the left side there, because we just want to move this over. And you can see that there's a little bit of an issue there. You can see that it does that, but we do have a problem on the bottom right. You can see that it's going a little bit too far on the bottom right. So let's actually hit Control Plus to grab a little bit more of this. Grab it on the X and move it over. And maybe a little bit less. So basically, adjust these points as best as you can to where we no longer see that happening. So we can move this over and then adjust it as we need, like this here. So there we go. We've made some adjustments and you can see that it looks pretty good from over here. You can reduce this down a little bit if you'd like, and you can see that we are starting to see a little bit of an issue. So you will have to adjust that. But at this particular voxel size, it looks pretty good. So what we'll do here is we're going to hit Shift D to duplicate this and right click. And we're going to call this text, or actually we'll call this D since we called the other one. So we'll call it D, remesh, and we will move this over to our save file. And this one, we will just call this D. And we can actually call this baked. Because what we're going to do is we're going to right click, we're going to convert to a mesh, and then when we go to tab view, or edit mode here, you can see that everything is now set to a proper mesh. And if you needed to, you could make some adjustments here, but once we create a soft body, it's going to get a little bit like kind of weird and floppy anyway, so you don't need to worry too much about that. So let's move out of isolated view here by hitting numpad, and we can rotate on X by 90 degrees to set it up like this. And what we'll do here is go to where it says physics properties, and we'll turn on soft body. I'm sure a lot of you don't have as powerful of a computer and you don't want it to take very long, so let's just reduce this down to 50 frames here from start to end. And also, let's go down into where it says soft body cache, and let's just change this to 50 frames now anyway, just to make sure that's set before we do anything. And if we press play here, you'll notice that some stuff happens. And it sort of like bounces, and it's there, and it sort of looks kind of neat. We have a soft body simulation that's already working, but you can see that it's sort of just like bouncing there, and it doesn't necessarily look like it's connecting with the ground. And that's because if we go into the settings over here, you can see this right here. It says goal. If you turn that off, it will basically just use the overall weight of the object, and it uses the gravity of the scene to create this effect here. And there's some things that we can do to make this look a bit better. Now, you can feel free to use goal if you'd like and play around with that, but for the purposes of this and making it look similar to what I showed you, we're going to do a couple things here. So let's go up and we're actually going to change the mass here to something like a 0.1. And once we do that, you can see that it's slower. And that's because it's needing to calculate more things here. And if we go down here to self collision, we also want to turn that on because we don't want it just sort of collapsing in on itself like this. We want to turn that on. And you can see there, now it's going to take a little bit longer to do the simulation, but you can see that it's starting to sort of like fold up on itself instead of just collapsing into a puddle on the ground. It's still kind of a puddle, but not quite the same. So in order for us to make this look more like a gummy worm or something like that, what we have to do is create some sort of stiffness to this object in order for it to maintain that shape, but also be more of like a soft body. And how we do that is if you go down here to bending and we turn some of this stuff on, you can see that it's now becoming more stiff. And it's no longer just falling in on itself. It actually has some sort of structure to it so that it does bend and it does wiggle around, but it doesn't quite have that weird look to it where it just falls in on itself. And just to show you, let's take this bending and put it down to a 1. And you can see that now it bends even more and it collapses in on itself even more. So it has less of a structure. You can see there, oh, it was just about to fall down. So you could do some pretty neat stuff with this. So let's take this bending, maybe change it to a 1.5 and see how that works. So that's not quite, I would say, a jelly-like or a gummy worm type. And let's actually move this up a little bit on the z-axis so it has a little bit more that it drops down so we can see what that does. So you can see it has a little bit more of an impact there. That looks kind of neat. And what we could do is we can actually grab a frame and just use that for a render. But let's see what happens if we change this bending to just a 1. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, not quite enough structure. Let's try a 1.25. And you can play with this and see what it looks like, what you actually like it to look like, and what you're really going for to see if you want it to bend that much or you're doing a more complex simulation with moving floors or something like that. But let's say that, this is what we want. Let's just say that we want it to look like that. So it seems to me that a 1.35 looks pretty good on what I've created here. And you can see here that there's a push-pull data points for these. And you can feel free to play with these if you'd like. You can try adding some stiffness here to see how that works and add some of these here. But since this is sort of a beginner tutorial, I really don't want to go too far into these here. It's really something that you need to experiment with. And if you find that you're getting a little bit stuck, one thing to keep in mind with doing simulations like this, especially cloth simulations, which is really what a soft body simulation is, if we go up here and we turn on statistics, and if I go into edit mode, you can see here that for the faces that I have, it's 1,470. So with this amount of mesh data, this is the simulation that occurs. And if we were to actually subdivide this more, it would be more sort of like floppy, I guess is the best way I can explain it. And we'd have to add more bending here. So if you find that your particular object is really still just collapsing in on itself, increase the bending. Or if the amount of faces that you have is less than this amount, meaning it's a less complex mesh that you're using for the simulation, you might need to reduce the amount of bending because everything in the simulation is based on the mesh data that is being processed. So what we're going to do here is that, let's just say that this looks good. I'm going to shade this as smooth like that. And I'm going to go over here to where it says bake. And you can see here that I have this stuff here. And let's go ahead and save our project at this point. And we can bake out the information. And you can see here that now it's baked out and everything here is going to be grayed out because we can't really make any changes until we delete the bake and then rebake the data. Now, when we go to render this out, this is going to look a little bit weird because we can actually see the mesh data right here. We can see the mesh information. It looks kind of weird. So what we'll want to do is go in here and add a subdivision surface modifier just to make all that stuff a little bit smoother. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you some really quick materials that you can use to make this look kind of neat. So let's go over to our render settings, change it to cycles. You can use Eevee for part of this, but I do recommend cycles because it does look better. For the floor, we're just going to make this a white, and we're going to put the roughness all the way up, just for the purposes of this particular project. And if you want to see more detailed information on how to do materials, I do have a lot of videos on my channel that you can check that out. But let's go ahead and split the panel here. I'm going to change this to the shader editor. And let's take this and we're going to isolate this with /. And just because we don't need this, we're going to turn off the statistics here. And I'm going to go over to the world settings and I'm going to grab an HDRI for the environment texture. You can get these from Polyhaven. I will link where you can get some of these down below, but let's go ahead and choose this one here. You can choose really whatever you'd like and go to rendered view. So if we go here and we actually take the film and we make that transparent, we can look at our object by itself. And over here, we can create a new material here or go to the material settings, press new, and we're going to create a really fun gummy sort of material for this object. I'm going to turn off the overlays here just so that we can look at this by itself. What we're going to do is we're going to change this to a fully transmission object, meaning it's like a glass, and we're going to take the roughness and move this a little bit down. And we already have a kind of funky shape here, and you could just take this and change it to a different color and call it a day, but we like to do things a little bit better here. Now, what I like to do with these sorts of materials that are glassy is I like to change this to a multi-scatter because it tends to look better when we start to add a little bit more complexity to our material. And I'm going to add an image texture here. And I'm going to go over to these maps that I have. And these are all downloaded for the Pro Render Engine. I have a video on my channel that you can check it out where you can basically download these maps and use the image maps for whatever project that you'd like. I'm going to choose something that's a little bit scratchy. So something like this bronze corrosion bump right here. So let's open that up. And if I have Node Wrangler installed, edit preferences, and go to Node Wrangler, Node Wrangler, check that on. And if we Control Shift left click, we can look through this object. Now the problem here is that it uses automatically a UV coordinate system, but we don't have a UV coordinate system here. So let's hit Control T with that selected, and it will create a mapping node and this texture coordinate node. Change this to Object, change this to Box, and bump the blend up. And just for fun, let's change the color space to a non-color color space, which will help us out with a black and white image like this. We're going to place a color ramp here, use that in the roughness setting, Control Shift left click through the principled BSDF, and from this point you can move these around to change the roughness like this. And in order to take the texture and make it more repeated, I'm going to add a value node here, put it into the scale, and we can just increase this to a point that looks a little bit better. And we can actually look through this node to see what looks nice, because as it gets smaller, you can see that the value gets higher. The amount of tiles increases, which makes it look a little bit nicer. And if we look through here, it's a little bit easier to see with the contrast. And if we look through this one here and just move things around, we can adjust that roughness setting there. And you can change this to something else if it feels too rough and adjust these settings. Now, gummy materials and things like that, they're not always perfectly smooth and they have a little bit of a bump to it. So let's also add a vector bump and take the image texture here, put it into the bump, and take that normal and put it right in there, and take the strength down to like a 0.05 or something like that. You can see that now there's a little bit of a surface as well on there. And you can change the distance as well to like a 0.1 or something. It feels a little too strong, or a 0.025 for the strength there, and you can get a really nice looking material like that. Now we're not finished here because what makes these materials look even better is adding a volume absorption shader, taking that and putting it right in here. And to show you what this does, let's take the base color and we're actually going to make this all the way white. So if you go to RGB, make all of these a 1, then go down here to volume absorption, take this and make this a color. So let's make this one a purple or a red or whatever it is you'd like. And then take the density and just increase that and make sure that this is all the way bright as well. And we can make a really cool look because now the volume is actually what's creating the color instead of just the surface being colored. The volume is also coloring this. And just to show you what I'm talking about, if we make this a different color, like a blue, and if we take this and make this an orange or something, and we increase this, or change this to something else, like this right here, you can see that now the volume color and the surface color are sort of being blended together. So you can make a unique Gummy color according to these settings here and here. But just for fun, or for the purposes of this, I'm going to make this more of a white color and change this one here to a blue or something like that, because that seems to be a color that a lot of people really, really like. Now let's go out of isolated view here, and we're going to take a look at our scene all together, and we're going to look at it kind of like this. And let's go to the 3D viewport here. Let's add a couple lights, and this is not going to be for a full render. I'm not going to show you how to fully render this whole thing out. I have a lot of videos on how you can learn how to do that on my channel, but let's just change the surface of the world settings here. Let's change the strength down to a 0.1 or something like that, and take this and move it over here and increase the amount to, let's say, a 100. So let's just quickly adjust some of these lights so it's not so bright. I'm just going to take these down to maybe a 20 or a 25, maybe take this one down to a 50 or something, and we can move these around, and you can change the radius color or the radius size and stuff if you'd like. But what I want to show you is the darkness of the sort of gel color here and how we can adjust some of these settings. And you can see that the floor is a little bit below this surface. So what you'll need to do is actually duplicate or make a new plane like this, make it a little bit larger, and actually grab this on the Z and make it a new floor like this, because sometimes your simulation is not going to be 100% connected to the floor. That's just how it is sometimes when you have a collision surface. So you might need to do that. Call one a collision and turn that one off, and don't render it, but keep it in your scene. And then for this one here, we can actually call this floor and make sure that we're using the same material for the floor. We can call this floor, and we'll just call this Gummy. Now, to enhance the sort of gummy nature of this, a lot of times the shadow needs to be adjusted because it might be a little bit too dark for the lighting that you have and the scene, and you might want a little bit more of the caustics to show through this like blue color here. So what we want to do is make the shadows less visible on and inside of our object. And how we do that is by going to Input, Light Path, and now we have a whole bunch of light path information here. And don't get too confused. I'm going to show you, basically how simple this is. We're going to go to an Add Shader here, and we need to have a transparent shader. And for fun, we need to have a mix shader here. And just leave this, it's fine if it's just like that. And what we'll need to do is take this one, pipe it into there, and let's just look through this right here. And if we look through there, you can see that there is a transparency, and this is basically going between a fully transparent, where we can see the volume and some of the other stuff from this here, and the fully opaque or transmission material that we have here. But what we need to do is we need to take the shadow ray here, put it into the color, and then now we can decide by moving this to the left or the right. You can see that we're taking the shadows either completely out, and all that you're left with is this reflected light here. And if we pump this up, we can change how much shadows are actually visible in the scene. So this is one way to really have your gummy object more clear, and it will sort of glow in your scene by adjusting the shadow ray. Or you can have it just a little bit there, or halfway there, and you can adjust how much shadow is in and on your object and being cast from the object. From that point, what you want to do for your render settings is just make sure that whatever your light paths are, that you increase the transmission either here in the max bounces here, or I suggest using the fast GI approximation, increasing this value to about a 12 or a 16, and make the render a 0, which will match your viewport, and so you know exactly what you're going to get in your final, and rendering out your scene like that. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. I will include this project file as well in the Gumroad download if you'd like to download the actual project file itself along with the other ones that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Thanks again so much to everybody who is subscribers, my members, and to my patrons, you guys give me all of the reason to make these things and to share my knowledge and the things that I discover inside of this awesome program. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials. So that's going to be it for this tutorial. I will be providing this project file in the actual Gumroad download. So you're going to have this and the other things that I showed you in the beginning all in one download package from the Gumroad that is going to be in the video description below. If you'd like to see a more advanced tutorial or something that's more in the realm of doing a full simulation and rendering an entire animation or something more complex than this, please leave a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks again to all my subscribers, the members on the channel, and to my patrons. You guys give me all the reason to basically make these tutorials and videos to share my knowledge. And I will see you all next time on DJ Tutorials.